One of the biggest mistakes I see self publishing children's book authors make is depending on their illustrator to do everything. Now, don't get me wrong, the illustrator plays an important role in your kidlit book or your picture book, but you shouldn't depend on them to do everything. Now, listen, I am a book designer, but I am not an illustrator. I am also a children's book author, but I did not illustrate the books myself, and I would never even think to do that. Just ask my kids about my talent and skills when it comes to illustrating. I can't draw an animal to save my life, but I am a seasoned and experienced book designer, and that is my specialty. It's the same for illustrators. They have a specialty and we should use them to their fullest potential. However, let me say that not all illustrators, and I would even say a very small percentage of illustrators, actually have the expertise or the training to design your book. So today I want to point out three different roles that you need to consider in searching and hiring a either a formatter, a book designer, or an art director to help you with the process of going from just a manuscript to an illustrated book and to a completed formatted book for the printer. So let's dive into this. First of all, there's the formatter. Now, many authors ask for a formatter when what they really need is a designer, and that can get a little tricky, especially if I'm giving an invoice or giving a quote for formatting work when what they really need is the full book design. So, what is it that the formatter does? See, the formatter, and obviously that's a little confusing because when you look at a Word document, you think of formatting as choosing the fonts and making sure they're the right size, making sure the margins are correct, all that kind of stuff. And while that is all correct, and maybe that plays a little bit into formatting a book, really the formatter's job of a book is to make sure that the finished files correctly match the printer's specifications. So if the book is laid out in Adobe InDesign or some other program, they have to make sure that the margins are correct, the bleed is correct, the dimensions of the book, all these things are correct for the printer, and so many other things. Making sure the illustrations are in CMYK, and making sure that everything has the quality that the printer expects. That's the job of the formatter, and it's a very detail oriented role that the designer plays. And I say the designer because typically it's the designer that will also be doing the formatting. Now, let's say you do have an illustrator who is sort of that unicorn, and they can also design the book. They can lay out the book with the text. This may be an illustrator who has an education at an art and design school. That's typically what it would be. Now, if they are a self taught illustrator, they most likely aren't going to have the skills needed to be a designer or a formatter. If they actually do have the skills to be the designer, formatting the files for the printer is even another level of skill that most illustrators don't have. So it's very important that at the very minimum, you should have a formatter on your design team, on your self publishing team, to help you cross that line from an illustrated file or book to a completed book, because a lot of mistakes can be made even in the design of a book if it's done by someone who doesn't really know what they're doing. So the formatter is sort of what you need at the very least. The next step up, I would say, is the book designer. Now, what is the role of the designer? Well, if the illustrator is unable to place the text on the pages, the spreads of your book. This is really where the book designer would come in. And they're going to do a much better job than most of the illustrators out there. I like to think of book designers as bakers. A baker will take all of the raw ingredients of a cake or pie or whatever they're making, and they'll mix it together. They'll do all the work it takes to create this beautiful dessert or whatever bread, whatever they're making, right? It's the same for the designer. The designer will take your raw manuscript after it's been edited. They'll also take the illustrations from the artist and they'll bring it together. So they're bringing the raw materials together. They're laying it all out on the pages within the book. They're doing the cover design, the interior book block design, everything in between from cover to cover. They're laying it all out so that it looks uniform, it's consistent, it all matches, and that it's beautiful. They're going to be looking for fonts that complement both the artwork and your manuscript. That is so important because many times an illustrator can do a fantastic job of creating art for your book, but they may not know what fonts are best to complement both their artwork and your manuscript. This is where designers' skills come in handy. Not only can they lay out the book and place the text on the illustrations, but they can also lay out more text heavy pages like the copyright page. Maybe you have other back matter, front matter in the book. They will help with the design of the cover, with the title treatment, and all these things to make sure it just all looks wonderful. It's that finished pie or that finished loaf of bread that a baker can do. That's what the designer does. So the designer not only handles the layout of your book, but they also do the formatting for you. They will make sure that the completed files that they turn over to you are ready for your printer, no matter who that is, and that it matches the specifications that the printer needs. Now, each printer has their own specifications, so it's very important to know where you're having it printed before you even get started. That's another video altogether, so we won't get into that. So, what then if you're at the beginning stages, you have your manuscript, but maybe you're just not visually able to see what the book may look like? You don't even know what kind of illustrations would best complement your story. Then I would suggest you look for someone who can be your art director. An art director takes charge of the entire project. You look for an art director who can help you find an illustrator who will create the art that complements your story. A very skilled illustrator and someone who can really imagine what the story could look like and bring a new depth to your story and to its message. So they might help you with things like storyboarding and deciding on what size book you need, or where to get it printed and what kind of materials you want to use. They might help you decide about color palettes and things like that. They're from the very beginning, helping you with all of the decisions along the way. Now, I like to give the illustrator as much freedom as possible in their creativity. And so I don't like to provide templates for the illustrator that has the text already in place and all these things, because I think that can be a little limiting. But I do believe an art director can be very handy at coordinating the relationship between you as the author and the publisher, the illustrator, and the art director as your designer. Um, they do all the work as the designer and the formatter. So they basically handle everything from your finished edited manuscript all the way to finished book ready to be printed, or even finished book already printed and ready to sell for you. The art director really takes on a strong role in your self publishing team if you don't really know what direction you want to take it. They can step in and really help you with that. So, what role do you need filled, or what roles do you need filled in your self publishing team? Have you hired an illustrator yet? And what are their skills like? Hopefully, you haven't hired the illustrator yet, and you can start looking for someone who can either be your book designer and help you from the very beginning, or even your art director who would take over the whole process and really guide you through the process of hiring an illustrator and getting it designed in the most optimal, high quality way that you can for your book. I hope this information was helpful for you today. And if it was, please hit the like and subscribe button. But before you go, I want to let you know about a book that I am actually just getting ready to release for self published children's book authors. The title is The Indie Author's Dozen, and it's all about how to assemble your self publishing team, which I call the dozen, and how you can interact with them, what their roles are. And I take a deep dive into the formatting, the designing, and the art direction portion of that team and what that looks like. So if you're interested in this book, you can actually access the introduction chapter to the book by going to indieauthorsdozen.com. So be sure to go to that website, get the introduction chapter, and you can actually join the beta team for the book and help me sort of get the word out for the book, as well as offer your own critique and opinion about the chapters as you read them. So if that's interesting for you, please go to indieauthorsdozen.com. Thanks so much for watching. I haven't said this in a long time, but write the book.